DawgNation, and welcome into DawgNation at Large. I'm Kaylee Mansell with DawgNation insider Connor Riley, who's giving me a look right now like he might have something to say.
I mean, we've got a great show today to talk about, so of course I've got stuff to say. Come prepared.
Okay. Well, before you say anything, I do have a question. You've been giving me a stat of the day. I have a question of the day, and this one actually was inspired by something that Mike Griffith asked me on Monday, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Looking at the next 3-game stretch for Georgia, at Auburn, Ole Miss at home, and then you've got Florida and Jacksonville. If you were guaranteed that Georgia would win 2 of those 3 games right now, would you take that?
No. Why would I accept a loss? This is a Georgia team that needs to win as many games as they can because, yes, you bring up that difficult 3-game stretch. They've still got Texas at home in the month of November. They've still got to play Georgia in Atlanta as well. I understand, the idea of, okay, well, if you go 2-1 and then you win the rest of your November games, you get into the playoffs. But the longer you can put off potentially a second loss, I think the better it is. And so taking a loss, even though it means you win 2 of the 3 other games, I don't think that's advisable. That's something I would take my chances on Georgia going 3-0 in those 3 big games.
See, I'm not sure if I feel the same way because now looking at the back end of the schedule, I feel more confident in those games, especially now knowing what Texas isn't. And also, too, I know I took Georgia Tech to make the playoff. I could see them coming in as a 1-loss team and then Georgia giving them their second loss, and both teams still end up making the playoffs because I'm always going to be more confident in a Georgia win over Georgia Tech. But these next 3 games are very confusing. I feel like the SEC is just a really confusing place right now. The more I watch teams, the more confused I am, and especially when it comes to these 3 teams in particular, I just don't know if I could go against a guaranteed 2-win stretch or 2 out of 3. So I might have to take the opposite opinion of you and take the guaranteed 2 wins. Not like anybody's doing that for us, but just hypothetically,
Just be careful accepting losses, especially in this day and age where it's more subjective than ever who gets into the college football playoff. I know last year every 2-loss SEC team got in. The way things are shaping up now, and look, the losses will come. They always do in this sport. There's a very clear path where a 10-2 Georgia, because of the number of SEC teams there are, could potentially get left out of the playoffs. So I'm putting off that second loss for as long as I can, even though I think, to your point, like there's a world where they lose this week to Auburn, and there's a world where they lose next week to Ole Miss, and then you're sitting at 3 losses, and the season's probably over at that point.
Yeah, I feel like you could make a case for any of these teams to come out on the other side of that. But if they are going to be successful in this 3-game stretch, it's all got to start with Auburn, which is what we're going to get into today on DawgNation at Large.
It's the show for the new breed of Georgia Bulldog fan. This is DawgNation at Large with DawgNation insiders Connor Riley and Kaylee Mansell.
It's the big, bad road trip to Jordan-Hare Stadium. Am I looking forward to it? I don't know. I think I would rather have this game at home, but it's a good test for Georgia. Anywhere on the road in the SEC is a good challenge, and I'm excited to see how Georgia fares in that challenge. And specifically when it comes to the defense, what does the Georgia defense look like coming out against Auburn? Can this be that breakthrough game that it feels like we've been waiting for Georgia to have? I don't really consider Kentucky to be that breakthrough opponent, but this is an opponent where if the Georgia defense looks good, you feel a little bit better about what you have moving forward. Then we'll do our Dog Bite segment. We'll cover a variety of topics today. We're going to talk about Elyiss Williams, Gunner Stockton, as well as Monroe Freeling, and also, too, now what the transfer portal window means for the state of college football and just our personal thoughts on it. Then we'll do our favorite tweets of the week. Connor says this might be the best one that he's ever submitted. It took everything I had in me not to take a peek at it. So you'll see my reaction in real time to that later. And then in honor of Cam Newton having his jersey retired at Auburn, if we could pick 2 Georgia players to have their jersey retired next, who would we take? I imagine all of our answers are going to be pretty similar on that. And then the touchdown predictions. And we're going to have a new ruling after this week if nobody can get theirs right, because we got to start putting points up on the board. All right, let's talk about the Georgia defense at Auburn. The Georgia defense at this point in the season has not looked like a typical Kirby Smart defense at this point, especially when it comes to the pass rush and just all around the cornerback play. However, for me, this is a game where I feel like we can learn a lot about the Georgia defense because up until this point, Georgia has not faced a true dual threat quarterback, but it's also about adapting on the fly too, because at least for me, looking at this Auburn offense, super confusing, no identity yet. So can they continue to make those in-game adjustments and also get better at the things that I feel like we've seen them be weaker at this point in the season.
Yeah, this is an Auburn offense that in road games, mind you, against Oklahoma and Texas A&M, two strong defenses, was incredibly limited. They did not convert a third down in that game against Texas A&M. I believe they gave up 10 sacks in the loss to Oklahoma. Now, both those games were on the road. But this is a game where if you're Georgia, and look, I think Auburn, to its credit, has closed the talent gap between these two programs under Hugh Freeze. He's in his third year. They're in charge of the program. So this is a game where I believe Georgia has been very vanilla, been very conservative with how they have played their defense to this point in the year, traditionally trying to rely on talent. But that talent edge being slimmer, I think you're going to have to change some things up in this game. And one stark difference, because Alabama similarly, I think, had a closer talent edge and may have even had a talent edge over Georgia. Ty Simpson was great on third down. He did a great job of getting the ball out of his hands quickly. That has not been the quarterback we have seen Jackson Arnold be at any point this season. He's been a quarterback that has held on to the ball for far too long. And I think that difference on specifically third down, because Georgia did a very good job of putting Alabama consistently in third and longs. If they're able to do that against Auburn, I do think they're going to be a bit more successful, even if Arnold is a superior runner than Simpson is.
Like Connor said, he is not Ty Simpson by any means. And one thing that we were talking about before the show is something that was really surprising for me to learn is that Jackson Arnold has not thrown an interception all year. However, has taken 21 sacks. He just holds on to the ball a little bit longer, tries to wait for that, and instead takes the sack rather than trying to make an aggressive play and get the ball downfield. So when we talk about the Georgia pass rush, only 7 sacks this year, which is tied for 13th in the SEC. Only Ole Miss has less. And on the other hand, Auburn has given up 21 sacks, which not only leads the SEC, but all of college football at the moment. You look at their games against Texas A&M, they gave up 5. Against Oklahoma, gave up 10. Now, granted, these are 2 of the top 3 defensive lines in all of the SEC right now. So those are really good opponents, but it still opens up the door for Georgia. I feel like if the Georgia pass rush or if the Georgia defense, if they can get 3 sacks, which would be a season high for them, I think that we are walking away with the Georgia win if they can get to that number. But the thing is at this point, if Georgia can't get the sacks against Auburn, I think you have to really start accepting at that point that the Georgia pass rush is just limited from here on out.
Yeah, it's the 5 stages of grief. And
yes.
if you in this game can't get home and can't get pressure, I think you pretty clearly have to just be at acceptance where this is just not going to be an impactful thing that Georgia can do. Now, there are ways, obviously, they can work around that. They have to continue to be excellent in run defense, and I think you have to play a lot more man-tight coverage against some pretty good wide receivers down the stretch. And that's going to start this week against Auburn because, there's an argument to be made that Auburn might have the best wide receiver room in the country with Cam Coleman, and at least in terms of talent. Cam Coleman, Eric Singleton, Malcolm Simmons, they're even without a guy, Horatio Fields, who they like a lot. So I think that how this pass rush plays, and this is a game in particular, I look for someone like Chris Cole, where, they've moved him around a bunch. They've played him at star some. You've played him as an edge rusher. They've played him as an off-ball linebacker. I think with the recent emergence of Justin Williams, and maybe you're able to play him a little bit more, specifically on third down, if you're able to play him off-ball, you can maybe feel a little bit more comfortable playing Chris Cole as that edge rusher type player and just tell him, hey, go get Jackson Arnold, because that's something just that Georgia very rarely does. And, part of the criticism that Jesse Palmer of ESPN had last week, I think stems from the fact that Georgia traditionally, they want to rely on their talent and just say, hey, we're going to keep everyone in front of us, keep the quarterback in the pocket, not let him run around and scramble a whole lot. And Jackson Arnold's certainly capable of doing that. So how Georgia chooses to rush Auburn this week, I think is going to be very interesting, because you've seen from Arnold so far, he's willing to hold on to the ball. So if you can play sticky coverage in the back end, a change they made in that Alabama game where they just said, hey, we're going to play more press man than maybe we feel comfortable doing so, and it worked. So if you're able to do that against Auburn, I do think that you're going to have a little bit more success than Georgia had against Ty Simpson in Alabama.
But I also, too, feel like in this game specifically that the sack production has to come from more than just the linebackers, because with the exception of Nnamdi Oboko last week, all of Georgia's sacks this year have come from linebackers, so I would like to see the defensive line get more involved in that. We could throw out Chris Cole as the impact player who's got to get the sacks for Georgia in every single game, but it can't always be him.
Kaylee, who was the player we talked about most from the defensive side of the ball this offseason?
C.J. Allen.
Who was the second most?
Chris Cole.
I would say Christian
maybe
Miller. Christian Miller was up there.
Yeah.
We have not called his name once, if at all,
Yeah,
this season.
that's true.
He has not had the impactful season I think a lot of people thought he would have. Conversely, I thought Jordan Hall did some really nice things in the second half of that Alabama game. He is not on the injury report, so it would seem to indicate that he's going to be good to go. I think he's someone where you look for him to have a big game, and if he's able to be disruptive and make plays there, I think those two guys, Christian Miller and Jordan Hall, guys who have been in this league, veterans, I think those are the guys you really need to step up in this game. Maybe can Elijah Griffin, who stepped up and played a little bit more last week against Kentucky, can those reps help him and help him get onto the field? Because I think he's someone who maybe uniquely on this Georgia defense is capable of just beating an offensive lineman one-on-one. I think that's something where those three guys in particular, one of those three guys has to hit, and we have to be talking about him after the game as an impact player. Because if those three guys are sort of MIA or not heard from in this game, fair or not, it's going to be hard to see a Georgia victory if they just don't get the production or at least the pressure needed from that interior, the defensive line.
So one thing I do feel like that has been going right for the Georgia defense at this point in time is stopping the run. And when we look at Auburn's rushing offense, just 10th in the SEC with a little over 169 yards per game. In the loss to Oklahoma, just 67 rushing yards. In the loss to Texas A&M, just 52. So clearly this isn't what Auburn does well. However, it's when they get in the red zone, 100% conversion. They score every single time. And 12 of their touchdowns this year have been rushing touchdowns. So I'm not necessarily worried about Georgia stopping the run in the field. It's whenever Auburn gets into the red zone. If you can prohibit them from just getting in there, I think that will be the most crucial part for this Georgia run defense, because Auburn doesn't run the ball really well, but that's what they do when they get into the red zone, and that's when they typically tend to score. So I really think it just comes down to keeping them out as much as possible.
Right. And some of those rushing numbers do include Jackson Arnold's sack yardage. Yep. So Auburn maybe a little bit better than you might expect there, but I think for you, if you're Georgia, you just got to put as much of this game on the arm of Jackson Arnold. Can't let him run around, something Georgia knows he's going to do. Kirby Smart compared him to a running back in that sense this week. And I think if you're Georgia, if you're able to eliminate the rushing threat and you're able to put Auburn in third and mediums, third and longs, like they did against Alabama to their credit, I do think that that's going to be an effective game plan because it's going to make the pass rush easier. It's going to put more of the game on Jackson Arnold, who has not shown that he can beat a Georgia team or an SEC team this season with his arm. He looked very good, and mind you, look, he's played in big games. He's played well in big games at home before, beating Alabama last year when he was the quarterback at Oklahoma. But I believe he only had about 60 passing yards in that game. A lot of that came with his legs. So how Georgia limits the ground game, forces Jackson Arnold into being more of a passer and forcing him into third and manageable, third and long situations, I think is going to go a long way in Georgia's defense having a successful day or not on Saturday.
See, Auburn's passing offense is where it really gets tricky for them, and where I feel like there's the identity confusion, because they're just second to last in the SEC for passing offense. And I feel like a successful Georgia pass defense kind of looks similar to what happened against Alabama. It was an horrible first quarter for the Georgia pass defense, but we saw them make those mid-game adjustments. Alabama didn't score in the second half, and when it comes to Auburn, they've got the receivers. Like, they have all the receiver talent in the world. It's just been a struggle for Jackson Arnold to get the ball there, and one thing that Connor and I had discussed is Auburn is coming out of the bye week. Do you try to come out stronger in the passing game since you've had more time to adjust? And so I think it's going to take a lot of adjustments from Georgia, because I think maybe Auburn changes up the game plan, having more time and knowing that Georgia's cornerbacks are weaker than you typically see. So I feel like just a successful passing defense for Georgia, they're able to make those mid-game adjustments, because I do think that Auburn's going to come out differently.
How Georgia starts this game, specifically when they're coming off a rest disadvantage, something, mind you, so, it's going to be clunky the way I explain it because it's a little bit hard. Auburn had a bye week the week before they played Georgia, and Georgia was playing a game. So they were at a rest advantage. Do you know how many times in Kirby Smart's career he has had a similar advantage where he has had a bye week before facing his opponent, but his opponent has not? Correct. Well, there were two instances in the COVID 2020 season, but those games were moved around because of late game issues in terms of number of available bodies. So very rarely has Georgia been in a situation like this on the other end of it. So I think how you weather specifically that first quarter, where look, that crowd is going to be raucous. But I think there's also a nervousness with Auburn right now, specifically with how they played against A&M and against Oklahoma, where if you're able to, sort of squeak out an early lead or get out, say 10-0, something like that, going into the third possession for both teams, you wonder just what that atmosphere might turn into and maybe even start to turn against Auburn a little bit if that offense continues to struggle. So how Georgia specifically weathers this first game, given how well we've seen Georgia, for all the issues with slow starts, they've been a very good second half team the last year and a half under this coaching staff. If they're able to weather that early storm and they're able to come out and start well, and the offense, to its credit, I know Alabama, it was a disappointing start to that game, but other than that, they've been pretty sharp to open up their games this season. So I think this is an example where if the Georgia offense is able to start fast, and maybe you even want to see them actually get the ball and put Auburn in some pressure early to catch up and try and match what you can do, I think that's going to go a long way in making things even more difficult for Auburn, because if Auburn falls behind in this game, and specifically with that crowd, which is going to be juiced up and energized and ready to go, especially Cam Newton have his jersey retired at halftime, if Auburn falls behind in this game, I do think that the crowd may end up working against Auburn a little bit because of the offensive issues they've had to this point in the season.
And part of them getting down would be huge, because I know that it sounds crazy, but one part of this game where Georgia should have the advantage because they have it on paper is third down conversions. And it's crazy because Auburn is worse in the SEC for converting on third downs. And even with Georgia's lack of success against third downs versus Alabama, Georgia clearly still has the better numbers. Think about Georgia last year. That's very similar to Auburn, where they get in a lot of third and long situations just because they can't get the rush yardage that they need to put them in third and short situations. Very similar to Georgia last year. So this is also a chance for the Georgia defense to show improvement from that Alabama game, that they can stop a team that's not great at converting on third down.
Right. And again, this is a program game for Georgia where I believe, and I've said this in the offseason, the SEC is setting Georgia up to lose this game. They've given Auburn the rest advantage. They've given Auburn a home night game, even though I think with what we have seen thus far this season, because let's remember the way they did this schedule. Yes, they announced after the Georgia-Kentucky game was going to be played at 7:30. They announced back in the summer that this was going to be a night game. They could have made this the 3:30, 4:30 window option, and there were maybe other games they could have picked. They wanted this to be a night game. They wanted this to highlight the atmosphere that Auburn was going to have that works into that advantage. They know, and I think even a Georgia fan would admit this, that the SEC is just more interesting when Auburn is good.
Yep.
And Auburn has not been that for a long time. Georgia, since the start of the 2021 season, is 57-6. That is the best record in college football over that time. In each of the in 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024, Auburn had 7 losses in each of those seasons. And it speaks to, I think, where these programs are. It's why the rivalry admittedly has fallen off. Kirby Smart 9-1 against Auburn in his time as Georgia's head coach. Auburn and Kentucky, the only teams that Kirby Smart has beaten every year in his time at Georgia. And so if this is a game where I think the SEC wants to ignite this rivalry, I think this game in particular is why the SEC went to a 9-game conference schedule to protect rivalries like this one, because it is the Deep South's oldest rivalry. But if you lose this, and you will have lost, I believe this is the 26th game, or the 20, dating back to 2006, so the last 20 times, Auburn has won just 3 times in this rivalry. Auburn needs this game, and if Georgia's able to find a way to win that, you send this Auburn program into an even further tailspin, where they made a pretty sizable bet on Hugh Freeze taking him in as the head coach after what happened at Ole Miss. And if it doesn't work out, and they're 0-3 in SEC play to start year 3 for him, that's going to put that program in a real tough place where, once again, they're probably looking to reboot and find someone who can do a little bit more, because talent, I believe, is no longer the issue at Auburn, and a lot of the pressure falls on Hugh Freeze in that regard.
So that brings me to my final question, Connor. Before the season, we had talked about this game. You made your point that you thought that the SEC wanted Georgia to lose this game, and so we both circled it as a big potential upset. And what's crazy about it is literally every statistic on paper points to the fact that Georgia should win. But there's also something about a team that's so desperate to win that's also a little bit scary. So now, knowing what these teams look like at this point in the season and all the stats that we've listed today, and everything looks like it should point in Georgia's favor, do you feel any better about this game right now than you felt when the season started?
No. I think if this game were played at Sanford Stadium, I think this game they win by 2 touchdowns. If this game is played at noon or 3:30, I think that this is a game Georgia probably wins by about a touchdown. But Kirby Smart, this will be his, I believe, 5th time to Jordan-Hare Stadium. Only once has he won by more than a touchdown, and that was that 2021 team, which proved to be pretty incredible. So this is just a tough place to play, and it's a game where Georgia, I think, is just going to have to find a way to win, given it has so many factors working against it at this point in time.
Usually we come to a hard stopping point because we are about to transition into the next thing, but you said something that I want to ask. Why is it socially acceptable that we allow them to say Jordan when it's clearly Jordan? Like, that would be like us calling Sanford Sonford. It's not spelt like that,
It's named after Shug Jordan, and that's just how they've chosen to pronounce it. I've been chastised because at one point in time I called it Jordan, and people got on me about it, and so it's pretty hard Jordan. It's just the way they pronounce things down there on the lovely plains in the village.
Okay, well, I will be saying Jordan because that is how it is spelled, and that is how it sounds in my mind.
Go, keep the same energy and heat y'all had for me for her on this one.
I'm willing to take the heat in this case. All right, speaking of heat, there were some players that I felt like were really on fire last week. We'll talk about some of those guys. Yeah, that was good, wasn't it? You liked that, huh? All right, so we'll do that here in just a moment. But first, we want to remind you that here on DawgNation at Large, we are so thankful to be partnered with Zagoria Law Firm because what makes them so unique is that they're the only law firm in the state that specializes in representing people bitten by dogs as well as those who have been knocked down by dogs. They are also the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. So if you were a loved one has been hurt by someone else's dog, give them a call at 833-GA-DOG-BITE, that's DOGBITE, or check out their website at ZagoriaLaw.com. Okay, now we'll get into dog bites. So last week against Kentucky, you said that you wanted to see freshmen get playing time. One of the freshmen that really stood out was Elyiss Williams, 3 catches for 48 yards, a lot of early snaps, and this has not been a Georgia team where they've been turning to the tight ends to create a lot of offensive production. So I don't think seeing Elyiss out there was a fluke. I think that this is a sign that we're going to continue to see Elyiss more and more as the season progresses.
Yeah, Elyiss is just such a unique player for this Georgia team and what he can do. And, yes, much of his production has come late with Ryan Puglisi in there. But I think of the Happy Gilmore quote, get me one of them big ones. Elyiss Williams is just huge. And so because of that, I think his size just makes things so difficult and so frustrating for opposing teams to try and match up that. You hear Justin Williams talking this week. Yeah, he's dunked on me a couple of times when I've been in coverage. And so I think what's most interesting to me, though, with Elyiss is, I don't expect him to get a ton of passing targets. I know, obviously, his size there, but the way they've chosen to use tight ends. But the fact that they feel comfortable with him, putting him in there as a blocker, I think is really encouraging for the way that his game is progressing. You're losing Oscar Delp after the season. Elyiss Williams looks pretty clearly ready to one day step into that role that I think Oscar Delp relies on this team, where you can question his production that Delp has, but he never comes off the field for Georgia. And you have a guy like Williams like that who's developing in his own right. I think that's very encouraging for what the future of this tight end room will continue to be.
Yeah, that's kind of where my head was at in watching him on Saturday, is knowing, okay, you're going to have Oscar Delp, a veteran on this team with so much experience, also a leader. He leaves, and yes, you probably are still going to have Lawson Lucky and Jaden Riddell, but you've got to feel really good about what you have in the future with Elyiss Williams and also Ethan Barbour when he gets the chance to come back, because we saw a lot of early production from him as well. So he's just, like you said, unique, one of a kind, an absolute monster. This is just the beginning for tight end Elyiss Williams. All right, so I do want to talk about Gunner Stockton too. When we look at last week's game, 196 passing yards, 48 rushing yards on 6 carries, so well balanced. I feel like this is the version of Gunner Stockton that Georgia needs moving forward. Doesn't have to be a crazy amount of passing yards or a crazy amount of rushing yards. I want to see the balance. I wish that's what we saw more of against Alabama, but so far to me, this is the best version of Gunner Stockton that we've seen both on the passing and rushing front.
Yeah, did a little bit of everything in this game, and I know he threw his first interception, and
that's fine.
First down in Kentucky territory, you can't have that. But I at least like that he was willing to let it rip there. He had a couple of big completions already on that drive. And you're seeing him take those next steps. I think Georgia, again, you hear Kirby Smart, as Brandon Adams pointed out earlier this week on DawgNation Daily, wanting Georgia to take more calculated risks with Gunner Stockton. And it's always going to be a balancing act of how do you run him, because you don't want to give him, 15, 20 carries a game, because he's just not built like that. But you got to be smart with how you use him, and he, I think, is showing a better understanding of when to run. You saw him picking up those big third downs. And early in that game against Kentucky, he left yards on the field but he had already picked up a first down on third down, and he slid down there, whereas a week ago he drops his shoulder into the chest of an Alabama defender, which I know excites people, but that's something you just, as a starting quarterback, can't consistently do and stay healthy. So I think you're seeing the progression you need to see from Gunner. And look, if he plays well on Saturday against an Auburn pass defense, which has been pretty leaky, you factor in what he did on the road against Tennessee. I don't think he was the problem against Alabama. He was not the reason they lost that game. If Talon Taylor catches a pass there, I think we're talking about Gunner very differently. And he continues to do the things you want to see. Where, is he going to be the most statistically productive quarterback? No. But he's a guy that you can continue to win with, and I think can continue to put this offense in the right situations.
And we talked about this last week, too, because up until Kentucky hadn't thrown an interception, and I was okay with that, just knowing that he was willing to take the chance to go downfield. And something in me says that maybe it's not a bad thing that he got that interception out of the way, because now it's not just like this lingering thing like, oh, is it going to happen? So it's kind of like when he was talking about it's good to take that early hit because then you get it out of the way. Maybe it's the same thing for that first interception on the season, and at least it came to a team where it wasn't going to change the outcome of the game.
Right, and then the response after that was really important to me. Well, yes, Georgia had to punt on the next drive in part because Micah Morris left briefly and Daniel Calhoun just got beaten in a pass rush. But after that, when he had Micah Morris in there blocking for him, 3 straight touchdown drives. And so you see the response from a mistake, and you see him growing from that.
Okay, so let's talk about Monroe Freeling. This poor Georgia offensive line, it can't catch a break, and there was like an eerie silence that came over the room when Monroe Freeling goes down. We now know it's an ankle injury, but I don't think that we quite have a grasp on just how serious it is. Do you have any insight on that?
It is not as bad as feared. There was a part of me that when he didn't come back in the game on Saturday and you're starting to check in with people and wonder things on Sunday, the worst case I think went to, does this require tightrope surgery, which is probably, a 6 or 7 week injury at that point. He doesn't need that, which is a good thing. I think with him this weekend, especially against an Auburn pass rush, which is probably the strength of their defense, it's a game we're just going to want him to be as close to 100% as he can be. And this is a game where, we're going to wake up and see how he feels on Saturday morning, go through all the warm-ups and pregame and see what he's able to do, and then talk with him after that and see where he is at. And you have to have Bo Hughley ready to play there at left tackle. I think you go in hoping Monroe can play, but also understanding that you're going to have to lean on Bo there. But if Monroe can't go, and I think that's a pretty sizable loss for Georgia in this game, just given what he has meant to that left side of the offensive line, if you don't have him going, you have to have Bo Hughley ready to play, because I think this Auburn defensive line is good enough to ruin this game for Georgia.
But if he doesn't, are you confident, not what Bo Hughley can do, but the depth at the offensive line? Do they have enough?
I think right now they do, and it's interesting to me that Ernest Green gets upgraded to questionable on the availability report when we're recording this at this point in the time on Thursday morning. I still think Ernest is probably maybe someone you think to hopefully get back by the Florida game at that point in time. But, look, this Georgia offensive line faced a lot of criticism of late. I've been very critical of them all offseason as well, and they played really well against Kentucky. And I think that, look, going on the road, they didn't have a false start last time against Tennessee. This Auburn atmosphere is going to test them. I'll be very interested in seeing how this group is up for the challenge on Saturday.
Well, after months and months and months of discussing it, it finally happened. College football is getting one portal window that's going to take place starting in 2026 from January 2nd to January 16th. I mean, this is amazing. I know it makes our jobs a little bit easier. I think that this is just good for the state of college football, especially after how we saw things go down this past year.
Yeah, I think that this is a direct response to what happened with Nico Iamaleava in Tennessee, where we're going to have we're not just going to have one portal window. We're going to have one negotiation window. And I think that is what, people are obviously worried about. And look, I don't think we're ever going to see collective bargaining in this sport just because it becomes so hard with the way people will cycle in and out. But I do think that we are getting closer and closer to a more unified lawfulness that comes with the transfer portal and with it, because again, with NIL and the transfer portal sort of meshing at the same time, it has just made college football an absolute mess. And I think that one portal date helps, and I think that is a step in the right direction. I know Ryan Day and the Big Ten coaches have made, in my opinion, a valid point of wanting the portal window to be open in April, and that way you're not worrying about classes and things like that. But I also think that there is a selfish interest with those Big Ten schools, because guess what? Big Ten campuses are not as pretty in April as they are, they're not as pretty in January as they are in April. And so I think that is potentially a factor there. But I do think that this is a step in the right direction in terms of making things a little bit more unified and a little less chaotic.
I have to say, I think that was probably the one thing that I wasn't the most excited about, but was grateful to see, because I just feel like in this era of college football that we're in, with the transfer portal, with NIL, with the 12-team playoff and them expanding it in the future, it's all trial and error right now. You're just trying to figure out what works best for you. They trialed the 2-window system. There was a lot of error in it, and they found the right place to go to, or what would be best for the state of college football. So it's good to know that they are taking these things into account and also just trying to help out with the current state. So the response from them, I think that was the thing that I was most pleasantly surprised to see.
And I know that there are some out there that are saying, well, what about the playoff teams that are impacted by this? There would be 4 teams that would be impacted by this, with the portal opening on January 2nd, because that is after the quarterfinal games. Those are first world problems that, hey, if you're playing that late in the season, you're probably accepting that fact.
All right, last one. We've been doing our other game that we're looking forward to. I think you can make a case for any of the SEC games this week, because I think at this point we're just trying to figure out who's legit and who's a fraud. For me, I'm most excited to see South Carolina and LSU, because I want to know where LSU currently stands. We were both really high on LSU before the season. I feel like they've underperformed to the expectation that we set in place, and this is going to be a good test to see if LSU is really a playoff team or not.
I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to pick one SEC game, and I'm going to pick one non-SEC game.
I grant you the power.
The SEC game, although, Texas-Oklahoma does deserve some mention with the weirdness sort of circulating. John Mateer going to play that game. Texas coming off a loss. The Florida A&M game is very interesting to me, because this is a game Florida riding high, but having to go on the road to play A&M right after that. That's an A&M team that is playing well, a bit of a buzzsaw right now. Man, all that goodwill could be thrown out the door, especially with some of the comments that came out last week by the Florida staff. The other big game that merits mention, because it is a top 10 game, even though I do not believe these are 2 top 10 programs. One of these just does not belong there. That is Indiana and Oregon. Indiana going on the road to play Dan Lanning in Oregon. Dan Lanning, a beloved figure in the Georgia community. And I would just say this to Dan, and I hope you're not watching, because I hope you're taking this Indiana prep seriously. I would love nothing more than to see you beat the brakes of Curt Cignetti in Indiana. I believe that the way that he played, specifically in big matchups last year against Ohio State and against Notre Dame, was just, we're playing not to get blown out. And if you believe in the team to which you have, with the gusto that you have spoken with, and then to go out there and play like that, I thought was very shameful. And so I am hoping that if Indiana tries to do something similar this week, which I think they will, despite, blowing out Illinois earlier this year, and I give Indiana credit for that, and maybe this is just a different Indiana team, but I was so frustrated by what I saw from that Indiana program last year that talked such a big game and then refused to back it up in that way. If they do something similar, I hope Dan Lanning, who has shown a tendency to do so, puts the pedal down and just keeps going.
Something tells me that Dan Lanning probably does not watch DawgNation at large, but Cody, if you're watching, that was the social clip. Stop the recordings. Just go ahead and pull it. Nice job. We know where Connor stands in all of this. Okay, so you mentioned Texas and Oklahoma. That's actually going to come up in my meme that we'll do in just a moment. One thing that we have talked quite a bit on the show about is Georgia Tech as a whole. Also, the meeting that Georgia and Georgia Tech will have towards the end of the season. This year, it is at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which has always kind of been like a second home field to Georgia. Expect the crowd to have more Tech fans, not more than Georgia, but we're encouraging all Georgia fans to buy tickets for this game by going to mercedes-benzstadium.com/events. It's a Friday event, Friday after Thanksgiving. That way you still have your weekend, and that way we can pack out Mercedes-Benz Stadium in red and remind Georgia Tech that even though they're closer to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, it is always going to be Georgia's second home field. So really excited to get to that game, and we hope that we'll see you there. And again, you can get tickets by going to mercedes-benzstadium.com/events. Again, that's mercedes-benzstadium.com/events. All right. I'm so excited to get to yours. Let's do Meme Machine.
Who's that coming down the track? Who's that coming down the track? It's a Meme Machine and Randy Black. It's a Meme Machine and Randy Black.
Hi.
What's up, people?
Is it okay if we make a quick change? I initially had Connor doing his meme first, but since his is so good,
I'd like to go
let's
last.
do his last.
It could derail the segment.
And I can go ahead and have this go first if that's easier on everybody.
You want to go first?
I'll go ahead and go first, and we'll
All
let
right,
Connor
let's
go
see what you
last.
got.
Okay, so I told you we'd bring back Texas and Oklahoma. John Mateer this Saturday playing the long game. We took the injury to the hand. Full-on Princess Bride moment. I am not right-handed. Princess Bride, one of my favorite movies of all time. I knew exactly what this meant. This is very niche humor. Very good job. Would love to see us find out that John Mateer has, in fact, been ambidextrous this entire time and was just playing the long game.
Very strange, just the coverage around John Mateer in this Oklahoma. This is the Oklahoma, a blue blood, one of the most consistent programs of the 21st century. Their behavior around John Mateer just has not been very blue blood-esque. But look, they're having a bit of a bounce back season. They're playing well. I think if they win this game, even though they've got a very different second half of the schedule, they still got to play South Carolina on the road, LSU and Alabama as well. I think it marks at least a very successful season and a clear step in the right direction for Brent Venables. And so that's why I think this game is so fascinating going into Sunday.
But go ahead.
One thing that I got from the Oklahoma, you talk about behavior unbecoming. The message boards last week were blowing up because the tortilla presser at the Chipotle talked to John Mateer, and he's 100% going to play in the Red River rivalry. So I love that. I also, anytime you could do Princess Bride for me, 100%, because I know something that you don't.
Is this a safe space?
I'm not ready.
Don't even say it, because this is in my Letterboxd top 4. Princess Bride, one of my favorite movies of all time, and it is a Christmas movie, so I watched it at Christmas. No slander.
This is not a slander.
Okay.
I asked if this is a safe space because I have never seen The Princess Bride.
Hey, man, you got work to do this weekend.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a great watch. Would recommend.
Wow.
I did not see it until later in life.
Yeah.
My
oh my
kids
gosh,
will.
it's amazing.
You cannot find someone to say a bad word about it. So
No, it's okay. Wow. So we have bigger things to talk about after the show. Cody, keep it going.
All right, mine. I don't know if this is. It may be a smidge too early, but Texas playoff hopes, and they've got the Spirit Halloween up. It 'tis the season. I've been to Spirit Halloween probably already 4 or 5 times with my kids so far this year. I think maybe they're not dead yet, but you lose to Oklahoma, and you can hang up the big orange banner as Spirit Halloween has moved into town.
that might be the heartiest
so
join
good.
laugh that we've got.
Yeah.
Well done with that one, Cody.
What if he upstages yours?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think this one is going to be very controversial. It is a 2-parter.
Okay.
So
my God.
this is from this weekend. This is from Kaylee Mansell's Instagram story. I'm here. If anyone sees Jesse Palmer today, please give him my absolute best. And then if you could go to the next one, Cody. So Jesse Palmer, who she tagged, liked Kaylee Mansell's story. This all goes down on Saturday, as you can see, based on the student section there. This is before the game against Kentucky, where during the game, Mr. Palmer had some very sharp criticism for the Georgia defense and the way that they had played. And I just found it very interesting where you have the interaction this week between Kirby and another reporter who brought up the Jesse Palmer. And now our own Brandon Adams has branded Jesse Palmer as public enemy number 1 here. I just find this all interconnected, very, very interesting. Where one of our DawgNation staff members, Kaylee, big fan of Jesse Palmer. I actually, to Palmer's credit, happen to agree with the criticism that Palmer had levied against Georgia.
Brandon's whole point is you can't let him say it.
Yeah.
It's like you're making fun of somebody in my family. Nah, dude, I can do that. You can't do that.
Yes. And I just thought that our wonderful co-host here had a just incredible, I would have loved, while you were listening to Brandon give the monologue on Jesse Palmer, just would have loved to have seen your facial reaction knowing that what you would put out there this weekend.
Cody was in the studio
right
with
here.
me, and I knew where Brandon was going, but I didn't expect the monologue to happen. And as we're watching it all go down, I was like, this is my fault. And also too, I happened to wonder if Jesse Palmer maybe like saw the clip and started connecting the pieces, like, oh, I thought this girl had genuine intentions, and instead maybe she was trying to
Maybe she was
start
being
the hate train
sarcastic.
on me. So I would just like to set for the record that he's not necessarily my favorite commentator out there. Jesse Palmer has my dream job to, number one, be an analyst, and to, number two, host The Bachelor. I would never want to go on The Bachelor myself, but I would love to be in that host role. The fact that he gets to do both, I mean, that is literally my dream job, and I think it's so cool that he has the opportunity to do that. So it's not just that, like, he's my overall favorite, but the roles that he plays, like, I would love to take over his jobs one day. But yeah, no, it was, I told Cody, I said, please take my social media tag off of the short. I don't want to be associated with this in any form or fashion.
I think safe to say this was an all-time meme machine segment.
No, that was good. Cody's was really, really good. Yours was not expecting that, but I should have. Okay, so one thing I'm excited about, both Cody and Connor are going to join me for DawgNation Game Day on Saturday. That's going to take place at Auburn. That was actually the first place I ever did an away game day show. It is one that I will truly never forget. I'm excited to be able to redeem myself for that one, and we'll have all sorts of guests. It's going to start at 5:30, always 2 hours before the game. Hopefully, we're going to be in a really cool location. I don't want to give away too much about that, but definitely one that you're going to want to tune in to see, because we'll have all the faces and also just so much to talk about, and hopefully we're going to have a really cool setup. So if you want to get notified when we go live for DawgNation Game Day, then you can go to our DawgNation YouTube page, hit the subscribe button, and then hit that little bell right next to it. That way you get the notification. And then, of course, Brandon Adams' post-game show immediately after the game, because he just does such an amazing job of conveying the feeling of the fan. So hopefully all good feelings. All right, so I think we can go ahead and transition into our next one. This will be pretty quick. We'll have Cody join us back for this one. Cam Newton having his jersey retired versus Georgia, which I totally understand them retiring his jersey. The Georgia game maybe wouldn't have been my first choice.
For me, and because I remember that 2010 season vividly, and like I went back and looked up the stats today, he had 30 carries in that game against Georgia. Like, that's just nuts. I think retiring that jersey against LSU made more sense because he had the iconic touchdown run in that game. I also think because of his performance against Alabama, which validated his Heisman that season and clearly clinched it for him when he came back from a 21-0 deficit against a Kirby Smart defense, mind you. I think that was maybe a game, but I think with them knowing this is a night game, with knowing that, hey, maybe this can tilt the edge in our favor just a little bit, get fans a little bit more involved, I believe that is why this game was picked.
Well, that brings up our topic of discussion, is if we could have somebody at Georgia have their jerseys retired, we're going to pick two people. Who would it be? And Georgia's only had 4 jerseys retired. The guidelines are pretty strict, so this is all just our own personal opinions. We're each going to pick 2. I will let you kick it off with your first one.
I got to go with the player that I believe is the best to ever put on a Georgia football uniform. That is Brock Bowers. Part of my own personal criteria is like it needs to be a number when you see it, you think clearly of one player. So like, you know, as much as I love Todd Gurley, there's too much history with number 3 for him to just get that. So for me, I'm taking Brock Bowers, that number 19 jersey. It's going to be the first guy you always think of, the first guy you always see when you get that number 19 jersey. Look, Herschel Walker deserves a lot of credit. I'm not taking anything away from him, but I just think with what Brock Bowers did in his time at the University of Georgia, 42-2 in his time here. If he doesn't suffer an ankle injury his junior year, maybe he wins 3 straight national titles. Led Georgia in offense in receiving every year he was on campus. From the moment he stepped on campus in 2021 to when he left in 2023, he was Georgia's best offensive player. 2 of those years, he was the national champion, one of only, I believe, 3 All-Americans, along with David Pollock and Herschel Walker. So I'm taking Brock Bowers, and I understand it's controversial. I know that Herschel put up a lot of stats when Georgia was just feeding him the football. I believe that Brock Bowers, with what he did on a more limited sample, to me, in this modern era, was more impressive than what you saw Herschel Walker do.
I think that's a very valid argument. I think a lot of people maybe would not necessarily agree that he was the best person to ever put on a Georgia jersey, but nobody can really deny his impact on the team, especially in a position that's not really looked upon as one that is that essential to the game. So that's acceptable. I take it. Cody.
Number 19, a lot of people think Hines Ward still too, but
that's a good one.
Brock Bowers. It's been a great number. So I'm going next?
Yeah.
I will take 27, Nick Chubb. He's the ultimate Georgia Bulldog, hard worker, kept his head down and then led Georgia, obviously, to the national championship game. It is one of those numbers. Again, 27 is always going to be who's wearing Nick Chubb's number now.
Yep.
So I'm going Nick Chubb.
And my fellow Northwest Georgia legend. So I'm not
Fellow
gonna.
legend?
Yeah, I'm not gonna turn that
Are
down.
you calling yourself a legend?
I didn't. Well, in some ways maybe, but no. A great representation of Northwest Georgia. Still a wonderful human. I would not necessarily call this person the most wonderful of humans. Not my favorite player of all time, but I do feel like, in terms of realism, the next one would have to be Stetson Bennett, just because of the symbolism of what he represents when you think about Stetson Bennett, the underdog that wasn't even really supposed to be that guy in the first place, but the talent was undeniable. The way that he brought that team together, he symbolizes the underdog, and so I think that number, the number 13, is just symbolic to Georgia history. It's like you said, instantly recognizable when you think about 13. That is Stetson Bennett. So I feel like, just in terms of like a realism perspective, that would probably be the one on the ballot that feels like, okay, he would get the most votes.
Look at you giving some love to a South Georgia
I know.
Bulldog legend. And I think, look, as time, and Stetson would probably admit as well, he didn't always handle things the best ways, but I think much more forgiving of the way Stetson reacted and the way he handled things during his college career, just given and seeing everything that he sort of had to deal with. I think as time passes, that relationship will heal. You got to see him on the Jumbotron before the Alabama game, sort of leading they released the Junkyard Dogs. I think Stetson is obviously a worthy person, given all that he meant. Heisman Trophy finalist here in his time at Georgia, at his best in big games. Again, he's the only quarterback of the Kirby Smart era that has beaten Alabama to this point.
Yeah, I was also going to mention that Heisman Trophy finalist didn't win the Heisman, but I think clearly that is a really big part of having your jersey retired. So the fact that he got to that stage, when imagining what the odds were of him doing that coming into the Georgia program. So I'm going to go Stetson. Give me the layup for the first one. Connor, who's your second one?
This is kind of an easy one for me, and he will make sure it never happens, but I kind of think, just given everything he's done for the program, it should happen. It is Kirby Smart's number 16 jersey. I think it is a pretty iconic jersey. You can mention Lewis Seen in there as someone. Lennon Humphreys is wearing it now. Obviously, neither on the caliber that Smart has gotten to. But Smart was a darn good player in his own right, an all-SEC level defensive back here at the University of Georgia. And you factor in what he has done as a coach. I'll be interested in seeing how they honor Kirby going forward, because, again, obviously they named the field after Vince Dooley. You find a way maybe to Smart Sanford Stadium or Sanford Smart Stadium in some way, how when the time comes when he no longer wants to be the head coach here at the University of Georgia, they find a way to honor him. I do think them retiring his number 16 jersey sort of speaks to some way to honor him within this program for all that he has meant over the years to the University of Georgia.
I don't even have to go. I was literally going to say the exact same thing. Not someone that had what we consider to be an outstanding collegiate career, but gave everything back to the university that gave something to him, and this would be such a way to honor him. Also, you go around campus on game day and you see all the number 16 jerseys, and so I also took Kirby Smart for my second one, just because if we're throwing out all the guidelines and just looking at someone who came back to their alma mater and did everything that they absolutely could and is leaving their name in the history books, it's without a doubt Kirby Smart. So I also took him. Cody, did you switch it up on this one?
I thought for sure you were going Jamie Newman for the second week in a row. No.
What number was he?
I don't know. Did he ever get a
He
number?
never played in the game.
He had to have been assigned a number, though,
probably
right?
gave him a number.
Let me see.
I want to say it was maybe 12.
I'm looking.
He
was 12 for Wake Forest.
Yeah, so who knows? The only other one I would think of, 47 of David Pollock. That's another one where I think of the number and I think of the guy. I think Connor made a great point, because you think of so many numbers that have been used throughout the, like you say 11 right now. My kid's got an 11 jersey, and every time he wears it, somebody asks him, is it somebody? Is that Aaron Murray? Is that Jake Fromm? Oh, Jalen Walker. Like every time he wears it, it's somebody different. So to me, I think the number has got to be iconic. Charlie Trippi with the 62 is kind of a number that is his number. A 34 with Herschel. Obviously, those have been retired, so nobody else has worn them. But I think the number that sticks out to a guy would be 47, David Pollock. Endless energy when he played. DGD for sure.
Since Kaylee had already said Kirby Smart, for an idea, how like LSU, they have the number 7 jersey and it carries a special significance. I wonder are there jerseys on either the offensive side or the defensive side where like Georgia could, instead of retiring it, assign it to give it a special meaning? You know, I think the two that have the most universal meaning for like great players or players that obviously meant a lot here at the University of Georgia are 3 and 11. You think 3, you think Todd Gurley, CJ Allen representing it very well right now, Roquan Smith, another guy that deserves mention for wearing that number 3 jersey, and then Cody just went through the litany of guys who had the number 11 jersey here at the University of Georgia.
This is a really great question that I would love to give more time and effort to, but I'm still trying to find Jamie Newman on the 2020 roster. Okay, this could be something. Let's do that for next week. Let's bring that up as our first one because we do have to get rolling. As much as I hate doing touchdown predictions at this point, spoiler, none of us got it right last week, so score remains the same. Cody 3, Connor 1, myself 1. I think after this week, what we've decided is that we're going to, if nobody can get this week, we're going to add in an extra stat for like a half point. That way we can just start spicing it up a little bit. I believe that I am first this week, and then Connor, and then Cody. I'm going to take somebody that I have not taken this season. I'm going to take Chauncey Bowens. Have not taken him this season. Feels pretty safe to me. I just want points on the board, so give me Chauncey. Connor.
I'm going to take a Gunner Stockton rushing touchdown. Now, he had 2 last week, and does that worry me a little bit? Yes. But I just think his legs, especially in a game where I expect it to be this tight, I think are going to be a difference maker. I have not taken Gunner yet this season. Zach Branch didn't get a lot of touches last week. Did a little bit better than Noah Thomas, who I will say I was very glad that Kaylee had taken the cheese on Noah Thomas because when I tell you, she was living and dying with every snap in the red zone that Noah Thomas was in or out for. This is true. And it just made it for a highly entertaining watch. So I love what this competition has done because Kaylee and I, when we usually sit next to each other at these games, we are taking note of who is where. and then, of course, naturally, Cody usually gets it right, which is just like the most defeating thing out there.
No, last week it was times where they're sending Bowens back on the field, and I'm waving him off last week. No, McCray, stay in the huddle, because I'm standing right down there with him. McCray, stay out there. You got it. You're inside the 10, coach. Just keep Josh McCray. I do feel like McCray would be another great option this week because I do think this is going to be one of those smash mouth kind of games. But I'm going to go Zachariah Branch. I think it's been 2 weeks since the Tennessee game, so really 3 weeks. So I think it's time for him to reach the end zone again. I'll go Zachariah Branch this week.
Okay, so final picks. I have Chauncey Bowens. Connor has taken Gunner Stockton rushing. And then Cody has Zachariah Branch. So those are our touchdown predictions. Oh, my God. Something's got to give at some point, right?
We got to be right at
it. Yeah. All right. So I don't want to ask you about what you learned today. There is a topic that I have really wanted to discuss with you, but there hasn't been a good time in the show to do this. So I feel like this is the part. This Bill Belichick stuff has been a nightmare from the beginning. Brandon Adams called it. I have to give him all the credit in the world for it. The documentary not being released, I would pay $100 just to the footage of what they're not releasing, but also to the fact that all these rumors are already coming out, the very brief statements made by not just Belichick, but the athletic director. This is an insane story to follow in such a short amount of time.
I, like Brandon, was against this from the start. You look at the way things ended in New England. He just struggled with talent evaluation, and I think that is such a key part of college football. And, look, him coming in and thinking he was going to run things like North Carolina does not have the talent advantage that I think maybe he perhaps thought it would have. And, look, he's done himself no favors with the way I think maybe he and his staff have been maybe antagonistic towards the media in that regard. And so I do think there's a lot of blood in the water and people wanting to go after him in this regard. I'm not even remotely surprised that it has deteriorated to this level. And from a Georgia angle, I wonder, Bubba Cunningham is the athletic director at North Carolina. Through back channels, he's made it very, very clear that he did not want Bill Belichick as the head coach of this program. Glenn Schumann maybe unofficially finishes the runner-up for this job. I wonder, just how different things are both at Georgia and also North Carolina if Schumann had ended receiving that job.
I am curious to see the long-term effect this takes, because I think this sends a message to NFL coaches that college football is not just a stopping place. Like, it's not just a fun job where you get to deal with 18 to 22-year-olds. Like, college football fan bases, if they don't see that level of success that they want immediately, they're going to find ways to get rid of you. And if they can't, then they're just going to make your life miserable. So for all these NFL coaches that have gotten fired or maybe been out of the job for a long time, let this be the message that college football is not just a fun stopping place for you.
Right now, it's harder to win right away at the college football level than it is in the NFL, especially for a first-time coach. And I think that, it is easier, an NFL job in a lot of ways. Well, obviously the pressure is greater and the margins are thinner. And so there's, I think, more pressure on you as a coach individually in terms of your own coaching ability. Running a program these days is just so difficult. It's something I believe Bill Belichick is just clearly not up for. And there's talks, is he even going to make it through the Cal game next week? I wouldn't be surprised by anything at this point with Belichick, as the story has sort of entered the fabled, Bill Simmons Tyson zone, where you just sort of, you believe anything that might come out at this point in time.
Well, I'm just can't wait to keep following along with it, because especially over the last week, we feels like we keep getting new things. So, okay, that's going to be today's episode of DawgNation at Large. I want to thank Connor for joining us in person, and we'll see you right back here next Thursday at 7 o'clock.